welcome to my podcast about all things educational technology. As an online educator or an instructional designer, you probably asked yourself, how do I make my students engage in online learning? With the online courses becoming more popular, there is a growing demand for engaging online classes that keep your students learning and keep them coming back to your online lessons. In this podcast, I will define and evaluate the issue of student engagement in online learning environments, make some predictions around the future developments in this area, describe two frameworks that may be of interest to you, and provide you with my personal instructional design tips based on my review of literature. So keep listening or watching to gain some valuable insights into the problem of online student engagement and its implications for instructional design. You may ask, is online student engagement even a problem? To answer that, let's look at some research studies conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic, when many students transitioned from an in person to a fully online classroom. According to one research study, in a sample of over 1,000 undergraduate students who started at an in person classroom and transitioned to an online classroom during the pandemic, 57% said that maintaining interest in the course was worse online, 42% said that keeping motivated was a problem, and a whopping 78% of students said that online experiences were not engaging. Now that we know online student engagement is an issue, let's define what student engagement is. The concept of engagement began to form in 1930s and since then, scholars conceptualized it as time spent on task, quality of effort exhibited, general student involvement in learning, and other definitions. This concept changes continuously and has now evolved into a multidimensional definition with three or more dimensions. As an educator or instructional designer, you may be familiar with the popular three dimensional framework comprised of behavioral, cognitive, and emotional engagement. Behavioral engagement is associated with students showing up to class, active participation, and class conduct. Cognitive engagement usually refers to students' interest and effort in learning. Emotional engagement is students' reactions to learning, such as feelings of interest, happiness, or boredom. How does this model apply to our online students? This is where we run into a problem. How do we look for emotional engagement cues in a student when we cannot see them? How do we know they are engaged? Well, we can't. The truth is, the concept of engagement has been conceptualized, operationalized, and measured in different ways. And this variety spurred many opinions that resulted in many interpretations, applications, and measurement methods. So, if there is no current reliable definition for online engagement, what do we do? Well, in 1989, Michael G. Moore published an editorial in which he equated the term engagement with interaction, specifically student to instructor, and student to content interaction, where increased online interaction equals increased engagement and in turn equals increased learning. Are you still with me? Great. Keep listening. We're about halfway through my podcast. As you can see, to solve our online engagement problem, definition of terminology, evaluation strategies, and qualitative and quantitative measurement methods are needed and should be put in place hopefully by professional organizations such as AECT or ISTE. I truly believe that this will happen in the future, possibly with the help of artificial intelligence being used to analyze the many definitions and measurement styles of learner engagement. However, for now, I personally will look at student online engagement as it relates to the three types of interactions. And now let's discuss some new developments around this issue. During my research, I found two interesting frameworks that I will now share with you. First, there is a bioecological engagement framework conceptualized by Melissa Bond and Svenja Bettenleer. that includes technology as a factor. The authors offer a clear conceptual student engagement model that can help guide future research and may be of interest to instructional designers and online educators. The second framework is the e-learning engagement design ELED framework devised by Beto Cherkowski and Eugene Lyman. Personally, I like the fact that these authors focus on instructional designers in proposing a learning design framework that includes student engagement. The ELED framework emphasizes interaction, collaboration, and feedback strategies in the design of online learning. You can find a link to these two frameworks and all articles I used in the making of this podcast on the references and credits slide at the end of this podcast presentation. We're almost at the end of the podcast episode, and as promised, I will now share with you my personal instructional design tips based on a review of literature. Remember our trifecta of interactions? Well, some of the literature I reviewed suggests that due to lack of physical presence of peers and instructor in online classes, deepening and integrating multiple communication channels into your online learning designs will help students develop real connections and will result in higher student engagement. In one article I reviewed, students valued student to instructor interaction higher than the interaction with their peers and expected the instructor to be actively present in their online classroom. A practical way to introduce the three interaction channels into your designs is by introducing icebreaker discussions and collaborative online communication tools. Some other ways to keep students engaged is by having clear and realistic learning goals, considering the students' perspectives and focusing on what is important to them, providing active rather than passive learning activities, such as real world projects, having content that is fully accessible to all students in the class, and providing ongoing and timely assessment and feedback. To recap, in this podcast, I discussed the issue of online student engagement and its implications for instructional design. I defined and evaluated the term and issue of student engagement in online settings, offered my perspectives regarding the future developments in this area, reviewed two frameworks, and suggested some instructional design interventions that may promote student engagement in your online classes. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of this topic. Please comment and let me know what you thought about this podcast episode. Thank you for listening or watching, and keep on learning.